Diane Marshall had been married to Kevin for 26 years. She knew his coffee order, his laugh, the way he always fell asleep 10 minutes into any movie he claimed he wanted to watch. She knew his allergies, fears, his moods. She had built her entire adult life around the certainty that she knew this man completely. She did not go looking for anything that morning. She picked up his phone because hers was charging in the other room, and she wanted to check the weather. That was it. That was all it took. 26 years. And a weather check. What Diane found on that phone was not what she expected. It was not what any of us would have expected. And by the time the full truth came out, every assumption she had ever made about her marriage, about her husband, about the life she thought she was living, would have to be rebuilt from the ground up. Stay with me, because Kevin Marshall was not the man Diane feared he was. He was something far more complicated than that. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Diane Marshall is 54 years old. She is the principal of a public high school in a suburb of Houston, Texas, a position she has held for 11 years. Before that, she taught English for 9. She is by every account a woman who does not miss things. She is sharp, composed, the kind of person other people bring their problems to because she has a way of cutting through noise and finding what actually matters. Her colleagues describe her as someone with an almost uncanny ability to read a room, to sense when something is off before anyone has said a word. That is what makes what happened that Sunday morning so difficult to understand, even now. Because Diane Marshall, the woman who missed nothing, had been living for 26 years inside a story her husband had carefully and quietly written around her, and she had never once questioned a single page. Kevin Marshall is 57. He built his career in commercial real estate in Houston over nearly 3 decades, the kind of career that grows not through luck, but through the steady accumulation of trust. He was known in his industry as a man who returned calls, who remembered details, who showed up when he said he would. In the neighborhood where he and Diane had lived since 1998, he was equally regarded. He coached Little League for 12 years. He organized the annual block party. He shoveled driveways for elderly neighbors without being asked. Diane's friends had a name for him that she used to find both flattering and slightly embarrassing. The gold standard. As in, why can't my husband be more like Kevin? She used to laugh at that. She has not laughed about it since. The morning of the discovery was ordinary in every way that mattered. It was a Sunday in October, the kind of Houston morning where the heat had finally begun to give way and the kitchen filled with light that felt almost forgiving. Kevin was still upstairs asleep. Diane had come down early, as she often did, and made coffee, and sat at the counter the way she did most mornings before the noise of the week began. Her phone was plugged in on the other side of the kitchen. Kevin's phone was on the counter beside her, face down. She wanted to check the weather before she decided whether to take a walk. She picked it up without thinking. The screen lit up. And there in the notification bar was a name she had never seen. A message thread she had never known existed. She almost put it down. She has said that many times since. She almost put it down, but she did not. The messages were not what she expected. There were no terms of endearment. No photographs of the kind she had steeled herself to find as she began scrolling. What she found instead was 3 years of wire transfers, account confirmations, brief logistical exchanges about amounts and dates and routing numbers. The language was clinical, careful, entirely without warmth. It read less like a relationship and more like the management of an obligation. The name attached to the account was Angela Reeves, an address in Dallas, a phone number with a Texas area code. Diane sat at that counter for 40 minutes reading back through every message in the thread while Kevin slept upstairs. She did not wake him. She made herself finish her coffee. She read every single word. And then she placed the phone back exactly where she had found it, face down on the counter beside the sugar bowl, and she went upstairs to get dressed. She did not say a word to Kevin that Sunday. She did not say anything on Monday either, or on Tuesday, or on Wednesday. What Diane Marshall did instead in those first 6 days is the thing that perhaps best explains who she is as a person. She gathered information. She moved quietly and with precision through a situation that would have caused most people to act pure emotion. She contacted a private investigator by Tuesday afternoon. She pulled copies of their joint account statements going back 5 years by Wednesday morning. And by Thursday evening, she had learned enough about Angela Reeves to understand that this was not a simple story. Angela Reeves, 38 years old, registered nurse, Dallas, Texas, no criminal record, no known business connection to Kevin, no shared history that any database could produce. The connection between her husband and this woman was personal, and personal connections that involved $400,000 and complete operational secrecy for 3 years have a very particular weight to them. It was the private investigator who found the deeper thread, a name connected to Angela Reeves through her mother, a woman named Carol Reeves, 64 years old, based in Dallas. And within that file, buried in records that required real effort to surface, was a connection to Kevin Marshall that predated his marriage to Diane by years. A connection from 1989, when Kevin was 27 years old. when he was living in a different city, working a different job, living a version of his life that Diane had never been invited to know about. The investigator laid out the finding with the neutral language of his profession. Diane sat across from him in a small office off Westheimer Road and listened without interrupting. And when he finished, she asked him one question: "Is there a child?" He slid a document across the desk without saying anything. It was a birth certificate. Date, September 14, 1989. Father's name, Kevin James Marshall. Angela Reeves was Kevin's daughter. That was the truth at the center of everything. Not a mistress, not a business partner, not any of the things Diane had prepared herself to discover. A biological daughter he had never acknowledged, never introduced, never once mentioned across 26 years of marriage, of Sunday dinners and vacation photos and conversations about everything and nothing. A daughter he had been quietly, privately, and consistently supporting for 3 years, to the tune of more than $400,000, through transfers that Diane had never noticed because Kevin had managed a separate account she had never known existed. The question was not simply that he had hidden a child. The question, the one that Diane could not stop turning over in the days that followed, was why he had done it this way. Why the silence? Why the secrecy? Why, after 26 years of what had been, by every external measure, a functioning and loving marriage, had he chosen to carry this completely alone? The answer to that question required Diane to understand something about Carol Reeves. Carol Reeves, now 64, had been 24 years old in 1989 when Angela was born. She had been single, working, and without a reliable child support arrangement of any kind. Kevin and Carol had not maintained a relationship after the pregnancy. Kevin had moved on to another city within the year. Carol had been left with an infant daughter and a system that was not built to help her recover the support she was owed from a man who was not present and not inclined to be. By the time Kevin met Diane and the wedding date was set, Angela was 4 years old and Carol was managing on her own without any meaningful contribution from the child's father. What Carol did next is the thing that locked this secret into place for the following 2.5 decades. She called Kevin. She told him that she would contact Diane. She would explain everything. She would describe not only the pregnancy but the full circumstances of their prior relationship. Circumstances Kevin had not shared with Diane, things from a version of himself he had worked carefully to leave behind. It was not a negotiation, it was a statement. She would say everything, unless he agreed to support his daughter consistently and without argument. Kevin paid. The first transfer was relatively modest by the standards of what would follow, but he paid and he continued paying. And somewhere in the years that followed, the nature of the arrangement shifted in a way that Carol herself has since acknowledged. What had begun as something extracted from him became something Kevin sustained by his own choice, because Angela had grown. She had become a person with a life and needs and a future that Kevin could see even from a distance. She had put herself through nursing school on a combination of scholarships, loans, and the steady financial support of a father she had met twice and could not call by name. Kevin could not make himself stop. Whatever his failings were, he could not make himself walk away from his own child. He chose instead to carry it alone inside a life that showed the world nothing but reliability and warmth. Diane confronted Kevin on a Saturday evening, 6 days after the Sunday morning in the kitchen. She had laid everything on the dining room table before he sat down: the investigator's report, the account statements, the birth certificate, a printed summary of Angela's address and employment. She had organized it the way she organized everything difficult in her professional life, clearly without excess, with no room for evasion. She told him what she knew. She told him she wanted him to fill in what she did not. She said she was asking him to do this once, completely and honestly, and that she would know if he was not. Kevin sat across from her and looked at the documents for a long time without speaking. And then he looked up and said something she had not expected. He said, "I know you found it. I have been waiting for you to say something for 6 days." And then, before she could respond, he said, "There is something else I need to tell you. Something I should have told you months ago, and it has nothing to do with Angela." 8 months before Diane found the phone, Kevin Marshall had been diagnosed with early-stage Lewy body dementia. He had gone to the neurologist alone. He had received the diagnosis alone. He had driven home from that appointment alone and sat in the driveway of the house he had lived in for 27 years, and he had not told a single person. Not Diane, not their son Marcus, not his doctor brother in Austin, or his oldest friend from college. He had absorbed the information the way he had absorbed everything difficult in his life, by himself, without burdening anyone, without asking for help. The reason the phone had been left in a position where Diane could find it was not carelessness in the ordinary sense. It was the disease. The careful compartmentalization he had maintained for years, the habits of concealment that had required real daily effort and attention, were beginning to erode at the edges. He was leaving things accessible that he would previously have closed. He was forgetting steps and routines he had performed without thinking for years. He had known, in the months since the diagnosis, that the walls he had built were becoming harder to maintain. He had been trying to find a way to tell Diane about Angela before the disease told her for him. He had run out of time. Diane has described what happened inside her in the moments after Kevin told her about the dementia as something she does not have clean language for. She had come to that table prepared to be angry. She had spent 6 days building the structure of a confrontation, and she had arrived at it composed, ready, clear in her purpose. And then, in the space of 4 sentences, the confrontation she had prepared became something else entirely. She was sitting across from a man who had kept a secret from her for 25 years. She was also sitting across from a man who was losing his mind and had been carrying that alone for 8 months. She did not know, in that moment, which of those two things was heavier. She is not sure she knows now. Marcus Marshall is 28 years old. He lives in Atlanta and works in technology and calls his mother every Sunday without fail. He was the first person in the family to sense that something had changed with Kevin, though he did not know what he was sensing. In the months before everything came apart, he had noticed a quality in his father that he described as quieter, slower, like a man who had started saying quiet goodbyes to things without announcing them. He had mentioned it to Diane once, briefly, and she had said Kevin was probably just tired. She believes now that she had noticed it too and had not wanted to name what she was seeing. Marcus flew home the day if Diane called him. He did not come home to confront his father. He came home to sit with him. That distinction matters to Marcus. He came home and he sat with Kevin on the porch for a long time without saying anything. Because Marcus, who is 28 and had just discovered that the father he had spent his whole life admiring had kept something enormous from the family, had understood something that Diane was still making her way toward, that the man who kept the secret and the man who needed his son were not two different people. They were the same man, and that man was still his father. Diane drove to Dallas alone 3 weeks after the confrontation. She has never fully explained why she needed to do it alone, only that she did. Angela Reeves answered her door, and the two women stood looking at each other across a threshold that neither of them had built. Diane has since said that the first thing she noticed was that Angela looked tired. Not afraid, not guilty, just deeply and specifically tired, as though she had been waiting for this moment for a long time, and was simply relieved that it had finally arrived. They sat at Angela's kitchen table and they talked for 3 hours. Diane had brought her list of questions, organized the way she organized everything, and by the end of the first hour, she had stopped referring to it. Because what Angela was telling her did not require a list, it required listening. Angela Reeves had grown up knowing she was the child of a man who existed but was not present. Her mother, Carol, had not hidden the fact of Kevin's identity. What Carol had hidden was the full complexity of the arrangement, the phone calls, the financial transfers, the particular shape of what it meant for a man to support a child he had decided he could not claim. Angela had received the money reliably from the time she was in high school. She had used it to fund nursing school after her scholarships ran short. She had known the money came from a biological father she had never had a real conversation with. She had made her peace with that, or something close to it, and she had built her life around the capabilities she had developed entirely without his presence. Kevin had come to Dallas twice. Both times Angela had been an adult. Both times the visits had been brief, careful, and emotionally inconclusive. She did not call him Dad. She had not found a name for him that fit. What she told Diane, near the end of their 3 hours, was the thing that shifted the ground beneath everything Diane thought she understood. She said he never stopped. Whatever he was to me and whatever he was not, he never stopped. Carol Reeves agreed to speak with Diane by phone a week after the Dallas visit. She is 64 years old and she spoke carefully and without self-pity. She did not ask Diane to understand her. She laid out what had happened in 1989 and in the years immediately following with the kind of precision that comes from having lived with the weight of a decision for a long time. She had been a 24-year-old single mother without a child support order and without reliable help. She had used what leverage she had. She said she was not proud of it. She also said she was not entirely sorry because her daughter had become someone who spent her professional life taking care of sick people, and that had required resources that Carol alone could not have provided. What Carol said near the end of the call was the sentence Diane has not been able to stop thinking about since. She said, "The last few years I had to convince him to slow down on the money because Angela did not need it the way she once had. He could not stop. He told me once that she was the one thing in his life that he had no right to walk away from, no matter what it cost him." Diane and Angela have met 4 times since the Dallas visit. They do not have a name for what they are to each other, and they have stopped trying to find one. They are not friends in any ordinary sense. They are not family in any way the law would recognize. They are two women who were both in different ways held outside the interior life of the same man, one who lived beside him for 26 years and one who never got to live beside him at all. That turns out to be enough common ground to sit across a table from each other and occasionally say something true. At their third meeting, Angela told Diane that she had spent years managing a specific kind of anger. The anger that comes from being given support without acknowledgement, care without presence, money without a name. She said she was still working through it, and then she said something else. She said, but he never missed a payment, not once, in 30 years. Kevin Marshall receives care at home now. The disease has progressed in the way that Lewy body dementia progresses, unevenly and with a particular cruelty, taking some things and leaving others, so that Kevin will sometimes lose the thread of a sentence midway through and then recite, word for word, a poem he memorized in 8th grade. He still knows Diane's face without hesitation. He still knows Marcus. And he still knows Angela's face when she appears on the screen for their video calls, which happen twice a month now, consistently and by mutual agreement. She lives in Dallas. He lives in Houston. They will likely never be in the same room again. But Angela answers the calls. And Kevin, who is losing words and names and sequences in the ordinary passages of his days, has not once lost her when she appears. Diane has not made a clean decision about her marriage, and she does not expect to. She has said more than once that she does not believe clean decisions exist in situations shaped by this much history. What she has decided is that she will not leave a man who is disappearing to face that alone. She has also decided that she has finished arranging her understanding of her life around what is comfortable. Kevin was the perfect husband in the ways that his community measured perfection. He was present, consistent, faithful in the conventional sense, kind in ways that were real and not performed. He was also a man who made a choice at 27 that he could never figure out how to undo, and who spent 25 years paying for it in every sense of that word, financially, emotionally, and in the quiet daily cost of maintaining a silence that was never fully his to maintain. The phone did not reveal a monster. That is the part of this story that is hardest to hold and most important to hold correctly. The phone revealed a person, a full, complicated, frightened, loving, deeply flawed person who had spent more than half his life trying to keep two impossible things from destroying each other, and who had run out of the cognitive capacity to keep the walls standing. The perfect husband. That is what they called him on the block, in the offices, at the school where Diane worked. And in the ways that word can be made to mean anything real, some of that was true. The love was real, the consistency was real. The coaching and the shoveling and the remembering was real. The secret was also real. All of it was real. That is the part nobody tells you about the lives of people you think you know completely. All of it is real at the same time, without resolution, without the comfort of a single clean answer. The question I want to leave you with is not whether Kevin was a good man or a bad one. That question is too small for what this story actually contains. The question I want to leave you with is this: is a good marriage one where nothing is hidden? Or is it one where the love underneath everything is genuine enough to survive what finally comes to light? Think about that. Think about the people in your own life who you are certain you know. Think about what it would mean to discover that the certainty was incomplete. And then ask yourself, would the love survive the truth? Because for Diane Marshall, on a Sunday morning in October, with her husband's phone in her hand and the weather unread, that question stopped being theoretical. And she is still every day living inside the answer. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not because of the shock of it, but because of what it says about the lives we build beside other people, and how much of those lives we never fully see. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know, would you have stayed? Would you have left? And what does Kevin's story make you think about the people closest to you right now? Subscribe to Claudia Untold Stories because these stories are real, and they are everywhere, and they deserve to be told.